All right. Well, why don't we get started here? Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to our silent hidden partner, Mike Hawkins over at Hunt Scanlon. Thanks for co-hosting, co-promoting this, and giving us the platform to have this hopefully fun and insightful chat about talent landscapes within the PE-backed community. I'm Jim Urquhart. I'll be moderating. I'm from Bowdoin Group. Bowdoin Group's a premier executive search boutique. We focus on helping early and growth stage technology companies build and scale their leadership teams, across FinTech, enterprise B2B, digital health, and life sciences. So that's us. Why don't I go around the horn? I'll let the folks introduce themselves. Susan, why don't you begin, and let's kind of just talk quickly about who you are, where you're at, and maybe a 20, 30-second kind of snapshot of your background.
Certainly. Susan Clark here. I am a general partner with TCV. I own portfolio operations, which means that I have a team of which we partner with our companies on bringing enterprise software best practices across the portfolio. A little bit of background: started my career out coding, then went into business consulting, and effectively love transforming and growing businesses.
Awesome. Thank you. Ishan, you want to go next?
Sure. Ishan Manaktala, operating partner at Symphony AI. For those of you who probably don't know Symphony AI, we've been around about 3 years. Single LP fund, managing $1 billion of our managing partners' capital. Exclusively invest in B2B enterprise software, where we believe AI will be the largest driver to value creation. Our operating teams, much like Susan and Todd on the panel, focusing on value creation, be it value creation in product, in go-to-market, within cost transformation. Been at the fund since it started about 3 years back. Prior to this was at Symphony Technology Group, which is our sister private equity fund. And then prior to that, most of my background was in sales and trading within financial technology, both on the buy side as well as the sell side.
Excellent. Last but not least, Todd.
Hi, everyone. Todd Markson, an operating partner in the Bain Capital Tech Opportunities Fund. Bain Capital Tech Opportunities Fund, it was created a little over a year ago, with about 1.3 billion in committed capital to basically fill an end-to-end Bain Capital technology platform across all stages of investment, all the way from seed venture to minority growth and to leverage buyout. And the Bain Capital Tech Opportunities Fund looks at investments in kind of application software, infrastructure and security, healthcare IT, FinTech, internet and digital media, where we have deep expertise and thematic perspective. I run the operating partner group here, or the portfolio group with a colleague. We are focused specifically on the Tech Opportunities Fund, although we collaborate with the other portfolio group members throughout Bain Capital to really drive value creation and work hand in hand with our investors, our founders. My background started off as an entrepreneur out in Silicon Valley, then spent some time in consulting, most recently at BCG in their technology and go-to-market practice, and then was an executive at a KKR-backed ed tech company, started off as the head of go-to-market and then moved into chief strategy and chief operating officer, and then most recently, obviously, with Bain Capital Tech Opportunities Fund.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining and being a part of this. So a couple quick notes, and then we'll dive in on some questions. So I think I speak for the panel when I say we would really love some Q&A from the audience. Obviously, we're in different times, so we can't physically see you, but know that the chat function is up and running. So shoot your questions over real time. We'll try to weave them in as we can, but certainly we'll try to leave a good 10 to 15 minutes at the end to hear from you all and get some responses from the panelists. So why don't we start generally? We'll kind of keep with you, Todd, and we'll go kind of reverse order back around and can you talk about how you think, just generally speaking, and kind of describing your own views on cultivating talent ecosystems, talent networks, how do you do that? And how do you kind of keep it top of mind when you've got certainly plenty to do on any given day?
Yeah. Ultimately, at our core here at Bain Capital, we are business builders, so we're constantly thinking about talent. It's at the core of kind of what we do. Bain Capital grew out of Bain & Co., and so we have a sort of consulting DNA. And so we are constantly looking at businesses from how do we create value, how do we drive this company to greater heights. And most of the professionals, frankly, throughout the firm come from a consulting background, strategic, analytical, operating background. So given that kind of makeup, we come with, we believe, a differentiated ability to both tap into the networks from our prior experiences, where we know colleagues and know people within the industries that we're investing in, to bring them to bear and to constantly, one, get insights into those industries, but also to curate that talent, cultivate that talent, and when there's the right opportunities, bring that talent into our portfolio. We also bring that experience to identifying and working with talent in the portfolio companies. And we believe we have a good lens at understanding who are the high flyers, who are the people that we think are great talent that we can both mentor and grow within the portfolio companies or in other portfolio companies within Bain Capital. But I'd say at the end of the day, a significant portion of my role, frankly, as an operating partner, is cultivating talented individuals, both within and outside of the portfolio, with the goal of attracting and retaining them. They're at the core of what makes our companies grow and be successful.
Excellent. Ishan, do you have a view on that?
Sure. So Jim, somewhat differentiated and unique as a PE fund, our single LP status allows us to go across a really large value creation opportunity where everything for us starts with an idea. Ideas get incubated through a 6-month, very vigorous value creation thesis. Once ideas are incubated, we then will acquire portfolios into the incubated entity. We tend to be very vertically focused, and within verticals, focused on solving high value, high urgency use cases. In this ideation to incubation process, we typically have a very large network of entrepreneurs and residents and consultants that help us in validation of the said opportunity. And the said opportunity has a positive validation. It's these EIRs and consultants that get significant CXO roles at our portfolio companies. Other than that, we constantly kind of cultivate a talent ecosystem, either by looking at portfolio companies that we have exited, keeping in very warm touch with the CXOs at those portcos, folks that have worked with us. We obviously have faith and confidence in them. And then ensuring that we are incredibly well networked out within the ecosystem, within portcos, what's the competitive landscape, looking at market maps, looking at movements of key executives. A lot of it also tends to be what can we do opportunistically.
Love it. Susan, do you want to offer your thoughts, and also maybe kind of double clicking on best practices or certain kind of hygiene around doing these things in a more scalable way that you've kind of either developed yourself or maybe picked up along the way?
As far as if we look at an individual company and say even a new acquisition, there's certainly the CEO's view on existing talent. And what we ask that CEO to do is to leverage a best practice we have, which is, and it's not only at TCV, it's quite broad as far as a best practice goes, but a 9-box to really assess and look at the potential and performance of the individuals within that exec team. So we'll have a CEO do that process. And then concurrently, we'll also have our internal team assess that exec team. And so we'll do a little bit of a data sharing and comparison to see, and ensure we're really looking at through the lens of both that operator at the company as well as at the PE firm, how the strength of the talent. And then once we've done that, I think it's coming up with a game plan on those that can scale, and unfortunately some may not. So that's a best practice that we use to assess talent. But certainly at the end of the day, not only cultivating the existing talent we have and looking for opportunities, especially those rising stars that we can promote and continue to challenge them, either within the portfolio company, or obviously we've got a broad portfolio base that we can place execs with the goal of retention of those key players. But also outside, we all have individual networks. And what I saw both at my prior firm and at my current firm is, unless you have someone that's really bringing those siloed networks to the forefront and putting it as a priority that we need to reach out to them on an ongoing basis. One of the things that we did pre-COVID was, if we were going to go have some execs from our firm in a certain city, perhaps we would meet with those execs that we were cultivating that relationship with. Obviously, during COVID, not an applicable activity. That being said, it is that constant touch points to ensure that you stay on their radar and vice versa. So it's definitely a concerted effort, and one that a firm needs to commit to putting the time and effort to not only pull together what that list of prospects and great talent looks like, but also how do we kind of build that and ensure that we've got them keeping TCV and whatever firm you may be a part of as top of mind.
Yeah, so you beat me to it. I mean, I think that's a great, example of, I mean, it's probably obvious in some ways that if portfolio company A needs a new CFO, then, who do we know and how do we think about finding that type of executive? But if there's not that immediate need, how do you keep people warm? How do you kind of nurture those relationships, and what kind of time do you dedicate? And being that it's so important, I guess, shifting back to Todd, any views on that? And then you can also take the view, the stance of, how do you leverage a platform that you all have, but how do you leverage your personal brand, to be able to cultivate talent?
Yeah. I mean, from a platform perspective, we obviously at Bain Capital have multiple funds across the full spectrum, from venture all the way to leverage buyout. And we have a large portfolio group that's been around for many years. So we are talking across funds and amongst the portfolio group oftentimes about star talent, about talent in the network, to reach out and find that sort of the top folks that we can bring into the portfolio. So that's something that is an active dialogue almost on a daily basis, exchanging sort of open recs, exchanging talent that's reached out to us that we know, and finding the right opportunity at the right time. So that, from the platform perspective, that's something that's extremely advantageous and is fulsome. And I think that's also an attraction for talent as well, knowing that if they come into the Bain Capital portfolio, there are multiple opportunities, whether it's within the portfolio to grow or, across the portfolio. And so, it keeps, obviously, if they perform well, keeps them with opportunities going forward. From a personal brand perspective, obviously I'm tapping into my experience, my 2.5 decades experience in mostly in tech. As a co-founder, is one of the ways, given where we're focused in the Bain Capital Opportunities Fund, on founder-led businesses in tech. I've been there and done that, been on that side of the table. And so that's helpful from a sales perspective, but also from attracting talent, knowing what to look for and knowing that sort of orientation they need to, run through walls and do a job that is, intense and all that. And then I bring as well sort of my experience at BCG, looking at Fortune 500 companies, and bringing best practices from that to bear into companies that are trying to scale and build those best practices that they need to succeed. And then, finally, just as an exec in a PE-backed environment, I bring that experience to bear. And so sometimes I'm advising the executives, what is it like now to be a partner with a private equity fund? Because it is a different environment than being a private company, or being a company without that investment, or being a public company. It is a different environment, and so a lot of times I'm helping them think through what is it, what are the differences. So that's I can tap into the co-founder sort of role, the sort of Fortune 500 best practices experience, and then the PE-backed company to help talent think through this opportunity and succeed.
Love it. And just picking up on a point that you made earlier, Todd, but I mean, and I want to get your thoughts on this too, Ishan, but you talked, I mean, it's competitive obviously out there. Everyone I think is generally aiming at the same select pool of high caliber executives for companies. You talked a bit about kind of, from the inside looking out and so how are you thinking about, and how do you advise, how are you working with companies to kind of home grow and groom talent from within to be able to kind of, isolate and identify those high flyers and make sure they're on the right track and they could be the next, the next best thing, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we work very closely with the portfolio companies to build, talent recruitment, development process, to attract and retain talent. As I said earlier, getting top tier talent to our portfolio companies and retaining them and challenging them to grow is something that is core to our success. If you have the best strategy in the world and invest in a great company, but the talent is not there at all levels, you're not going to get the returns, outside returns we're looking for. So we, spend a lot of time thinking about that. Specifically within the Tech Opportunities Fund, we're investing in businesses that still have very nascent kind of talent and HR functions. In some cases, they just have, a couple recruiters to put out job specs. They don't have a fulsome, HR and talent flywheel. And so we often in our portfolio are, one of our first value creation efforts is to bring in a world-class CHRO, a talent team to build a flywheel, build a comprehensive performance management program so people can understand what they're trying to achieve, how to grow, L&D programs, the stuff that at larger companies, many people take for granted, but at these smaller companies just doesn't exist in a fulsome way. And then obviously we're, hand in hand with the portfolio companies on a pretty regular basis. And so we often have our eyes out for great talent. We're working not just at the C level, but we're working 2, 3 levels, 4 levels down often. And so as we see people be successful, we, definitely work with them, mentor them, reach out to them, and work with the resources within the portfolio company to make sure that those are, key people we retain.
That makes a lot of sense. Ishan, any views on that?
So obviously do a lot of similar things in terms of best practices. There are 2 things that we fundamentally do at every portfolio company, and we do it every 30 days. We've got something called a keepers, watchers, goers framework. Who is the top talent that you need to keep? Who do you need to either watch in terms of they need the extra nudge, they have the raw talent, how do you kind of get them in the right role set? And the goers, where we tend to make those decisions as quickly as we can in terms of exits. Obviously do it with the right level of empathy, humanity, so on and so forth. But that keepers, watchers, goers framework is something that we do across every portfolio company, and a keepers, watchers, goers scorecard is shared with CEOs across all portcos and with the value creation operating partner team. Jim, something that you interestingly raised in terms of personal brand. Obviously, each of us go tap into our network and ensure that we can connect with the right candidates, with the right talent pool. But for us, we also extend personal brand into that talent pool that all of us are competing for is incredibly limited. We need to have the ability to sell the vision of the fund, to sell the vision of the portfolio company to every candidate out there, which means starting from the top in terms of chairman of the board, operating partner, CEO, CPO, down to the recruiter. Everyone needs to have a very uniform message in terms of what's the vision of the fund, what's the vision of the portfolio company. Please come work for us. Working for us has either an ABC incentive structure in terms of financials or in terms of what you can do in terms of building your personal brand. But people need to want to come work for you. It's an incredibly limited talent pool. And I would say within the recruitment process, about 50% of our job is pitching and selling, and only 50% is interviewing the right candidate out there.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. Susan, question from the audience that I want to weave in that I think fits to the next point. So, talk about, as you're identifying and acknowledging that, every company is in situation may be different and having kind of unique elements. how do you assess both for like objective skill set and track record versus abilities, right? Like, CEO candidate one has a track record, they've had an exit, it's pretty obvious. Candidate number two has high ceiling, some of the intangibles that are going to make them successful, but maybe it's not as binary. And the question from the audience kind of weaves into that. Are there unique skills you look for in CEOs who you found to be successful more often than not, within PE-backed firms?
Yeah, I think that there is, I've categorized it as there's two types of leaders: those that run the business and those that change the business. And quite frankly, when you get hired into a company that, say, for example, TCV acquired, our intent is to grow and bring best practices and ultimately scale that organization. And so inherently, the thing that I look for from a just DNA cultural perspective is someone who's not afraid to make changes, who's decisive, and who's going to really motivate and lead this organization, especially if you're talking the CEO, to that next phase of growth. And so there's a whole, bunch of other qualifications that follow, but those are kind of the table stakes. And not only hiring a CEO, but hiring, his or her exec team. So that would be kind of paramount. And then, as far as when we think about, do you take a risk with someone who hasn't been a CEO or hasn't been in that exec role versus someone who's kind of has a proven track record? I mean, you've got to look at the exec team in its totality. It's not just that one individual. If you've got, a bunch of seasoned execs and perhaps you're looking for a new CEO, you may be more willing to take that chance. And certainly what we've seen is, there's a lot of folks that are hungry. And quite frankly, oftentimes you put that person in that's wanting to take that chance, wanting to take that next step, and they'll knock it out of the ballpark, provided, once again, they've got, the skills and abilities and that sort of thing. And then, at the end of the day, what my team and I provide to our execs is a whole host of best practices and experiences and things that we've seen, work in other companies. And so, once again, one of those table stakes is the ability to collaborate. And certainly we don't want them just to do what we want them to do. We want them to push back and have, those really critically thinking conversations. But that being said, someone who's willing to collaborate and recognizes the beauty of having an arm of operating leaders and expertise versus feeling like that's, being imposed on them.
And it's a great point, and I think that, as from the executive search side, we talk to CEOs and executives all day long. And I think there's a common theme around, wanting to have the relationship with the investor base and the board where you can confidently kind of direct. I mean, if you're going to be the person they believe in as a CEO or a key leader, they're going to expect you to tell them where you need them and where you don't, right? I mean, certain, firms may have, and investors may have different, kind of views on that. But I think largely if you can have that kind of, comfortable balance and be very clear and direct and say, I need you to do this, I need help, in these areas. And you're going to be confident that the CEO is going to come to you good times and bad and not just disappear when things are, rocky. That's important.
Yeah. And I think there's this, I'm going to go off on a little tangent, but I think there's this demystifying of the board, demystifying of the firm. We're not scary people, or at least I don't think we are. We're here to help, and we're all on the same team, and we all want the same thing, which is to grow the company and really bring it to, just that place that we know we can get to. And so, I think that's where that openness, that transparency really pays off in the end. You don't have to hide, because that's why we're here. We can help.
That's great. And I agree. So let's shift a little bit toward, think about the diligence mode when you all are, kind of pre-deal, talking to companies and kind of getting into that phase before you've actually kind of, closed an investment. Thinking about that from, obviously, you want to be a good capital partner, and firms need to see you as that. But how do you think, we'll stick with you, Susan, we'll go kind of around the horn. How do you show value, and what beyond just being someone who can give a company a pile of money, right? Particularly in this market where interest rates are low, everybody's money is green. How do you differentiate and show value? Obviously, kind of thinking through the lens of talent and other value add that you can kind of provide to, being a great partner overall to a firm.
Yeah, I think it starts with number one, you've got now a set of resources that are ex-consultants, but also, quite frankly, in my team, I have folks that were consultants, but also were operators. So it's kind of that been there, done that. They've been in these roles. And so, my head of talent actually grew and hired, a company, or hired about 650 people and grew a company immensely. So when we talk about a company that we just acquired, and they're like, oh my gosh, how are we going to grow and how are we going to hire all these people? And I'm like, well, I've got someone who's done it. And oh, by the way, I have as well. So this is where that is a huge benefit. But just as beneficial are the network of resources that, when someone comes into a company that is backed by a PE firm, what they can take advantage of. And what I mean by that is we run these like CMO roundtables and sales ops roundtables where we bring leaders together to talk about, and we ask them, what topics do you want to talk about? What do you want to learn? And so, quite often it's less about us teaching them. It's about them teaching each other on, hey, we've had this challenge. We couldn't forecast forever, and now we can, and here's how we overcame it. And so there's a whole host of dialogues that happen outside of my purview, but we initiate them through these roundtables, through webinars and things like that.
Todd, you want to jump in on that?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of capital in the market, right? And so it is highly competitive. And so, just capital in this day and age doesn't necessarily get the job done. Now, there are some people willing to pay super high valuations where, we won't necessarily go. But, oftentimes we see that us sitting down with the management team in diligence, and we try to engage as early as possible. And this is not just the deal team, but the portfolio group. We're engaged very soon after kind of prelim, what we call investment, where we sort of align on the opportunity and say, hey, let's go after this. Our team, portfolio group team, gets involved at that stage because we're looking at the business from an operational lens, and we're engaging with the management as much as we possibly can. It differs obviously based on the process, to really start to get to know them, get to know their vision for the business, start to think about our point of view on the business and where we can help. And we're, talking about our value creation plan. We're talking about our network. We're talking about the roundtables that Susan mentioned. We're talking about all the opportunities that they can envision in the future going to tap into. And so, in many cases, we've seen ourselves win deals at lower valuations because they're attracted to that network. They're attracted to our partnership. Frankly, there's a kinship there where they say, because ultimately what people need to understand is that partnership is the next 5, 6, 7, whatever, the whole period is years of your life. And you want to work with partners who have an aligned vision. You want to work with partners who you enjoy, frankly, working with. And so there are cases where we've seen people, choose Bain Capital and our tech ops group to be a partner because they like that vision. And so that's increasingly important. We spend a lot of time kind of selling that vision to the founders. We highlight talent that we can bring to bear, advisors that we can bring to bear that help them grow too. Founders looking to also develop over the next foreseeable future. So anyways, that's really how we think about this, is that there is, yes, coming up with the right valuation of what we think is right, but there's also very and increasingly important, what is the plan going forward? How are we going to partner? And do we fit culturally together as a group? And in some cases, there's, where there's disconnect, we both mutually agree, hey, this is probably not the right go forward model if we can't align on vision. So, for us, showing value, showing that perspective early on in the process is critical to us. And we won't, as I said, we won't invest just capital. We are definitely, we'll invest, say it up front, we will invest capital, and we want to be, intimately involved in the business.
Right. Well, I mean, clear expectations up front, I think, make things easier, over the long haul for sure. Ishan, any unique thoughts there? And then maybe we can shift a little bit to starting to get into how do you start to in and around diligence of the business, diligence of the critical players, the leaders. How do you start to evaluate who you think you're going to, want to keep, and starting to identify holes? And then, we'll throw out a general kind of question in the group that's from the audience here is what's the belief and the value within cognitive assessments, behavioral, is that a tool that you all use during that analysis and that evaluation?
Sure. So I'll just kind of answer the former question. Everyone's money is green. The question is, how do you make your money more green than the other private equity fund that's bidding for exactly the same deal? We work through that due diligence process very early on in a value creation thesis with the target company. For us, we attempt to engineer 8 to 10x exits. A lot of those exits come from us being somewhat unique in having central IP, having a central data sciences team where we look at how can you supercharge your product roadmap through a AIification journey. How do you move your revenue mix from what may be a 1x multiple on services to a 10x multiple on AI-centric revenue? Moreover, just like Bain and TCV, a lot of our operating partners have been there, done that. We're hands-on operators. We understand the journey from transformation to growth to value creation. And we have the ability to roll up our sleeves and take on one or more than one functional area in that portfolio company, be it product, go-to-market. We tend to kind of be all-round athletes. Again, you want to differentiate yourself with the target company by saying, I'm not going to just be this armchair board advisor. I can actually come in and help you with a bunch of things. I often joke with the CEOs of my portfolio companies, think of me as your chief janitorial officer. Anything that you don't want to do, I'm here to do it for you, right? Such that you truly focus in that growth phase on the two things that, in our opinion, matter, product and sales. Just about everything else is a rounding error as such. So what we're attempting to do, Jim, is really kind of bring late-stage private equity discipline with early-stage venture capital incubation, such that we've got this best-in-class fund which goes across several growth life cycles, be it transformation, growth, and or value creation.
That's great. Susan, any thoughts there? And I guess also maybe we can start to level down into, let's assume for sake of argument, as you're going through diligence, you start to come up with some potential, hard truths, right? Some holes in the team that may need to be addressed, some other kind of potential changes or difficult conversations. How do you manage that and have direct conversations, but on the other side, like you haven't kind of quote unquote won the deal yet, right? So kind of the balancing act of being direct and setting the expectations, but you're probably still to some degree in sell mode.
Yeah, I mean, during the diligence phase, it's more so focused on what are the opportunities within the business from a value creation perspective. Certainly, we do our assessment of the talent. And if there's particular call outs that, for example, maybe they're missing a CRO. And so, quite frankly, we'll pull together a list of potential CROs to kind of surface, hey, these are these are folks within our network that are examples of what we would bring to bear in filling that gap. So we'll proactively do those sorts of things. During diligence, we get a slight preview on the exec team, and if there's gaps, I mean, those are the more obvious things to address. If it's an assessment of talent and whether or not this person is scalable, we'll probably have our early read. Now, if it's a CEO, then that's something we'll want to make sure we're addressing sooner than later. But if it's within the team, I'd rather get past diligence and do that 9-box activity that I mentioned to you, and allow for us, once the company is acquired, we then do our deep dives, which will allow for us to ask a lot more questions and get a lot more insights. The last thing I want to do is do some sort of like knee-jerk reaction to they answered a question incorrectly during diligence and ooh, we need to replace them. I think we have to have, in all honesty, spend the time, develop those relationships, and really assess, is this person scalable? Do they get what we're trying to do? Are they coachable? How strong is their team? And so all of those, come into play post-acquisition. And then we'll go from there. And there was a question actually in the Q&A as to, if you've got a differing opinion of say, for example, the CRO, the CEO thinks he or she's a rock star, they're not, and they're not able to scale. How do you have those direct conversations? And oftentimes what we do is show that CEO what great looks like, or what good looks like. Because, oftentimes, once again, these may be, businesses that they just haven't picked up and looked around to see what they can get. So that's oftentimes the, instigation point at which the CEO goes, oh, okay, yeah, I think we need to scale with someone else.
That makes sense. And some of it can also be, what people have done and what you've done as a business to get to that point in time is usually not going to be the exact same list of ingredients to get to that next threshold. I mean, if you've done a lot of more transactional selling and now you have to move to the enterprise, even a great CRO is not going to necessarily be, threaded for that type of a role if they're used to selling to a different audience, different style, different motions.
Absolutely.
Todd, any views on that you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think Susan answered it very well. I think a couple of things just to add. I mean, first, it's not uncommon to find holes, especially where we're investing in that sort of 30 to 100 million ARR business. And there are, gaps like we talked about. There is no CHRO. There is no specific C-level in certain roles where that's an easy, approach there where we're bringing executives we know that could fill that extremely well and bring that to bear. As Susan said, we do have a strong point of view. It is a short and, quick journey in due diligence. And, it's hard to have a full read, but we'll have a strong point of view. And frankly, in many cases, we'll talk to the CEO or founder about that and say, look, this is our, early read. Are we off or wrong? And partly because we want to, make sure going into this that they, that we're not pulling the rug under an executive coming in and on then making moves post that. So that's something that we do bring up and kind of, read back our due diligence, read back our assessments to the executive, to the founder before, as we get further along in diligence. The other piece is, we don't just look at the gap. We often look at the full executive team and understand, are those the right roles? Sometimes there's a CMO and chief sales officer, and we say, well, maybe we'd have a CRO can, span both of those. So we're really looking at the kind of the whole ecosystem of, maybe we need a chief of staff to help because the team's not functioning extremely well, and we need a chief of staff to help kind of drive that collaboration and some of the analytics. So there's, we're really looking at the whole system and not just sort of a one-to-one replacement per se. And the other thing is, oftentimes we are finding founders raising their hand and saying, I do want to migrate out of this business over time. And so that's something we do find in due diligence. And we want to know early on that, some of these founders are going to earn, a nice payout from the investment. They built this business to a certain scale and they want to go do other things. And they say, look, I know I can't run this business, going forward. I would like to over, next year to two, migrate out. And that's something that we definitely, plan out up front because, often moving on from a founder or CEO is something that's really culturally impactful. And we want to make sure that that is done really well. And obviously we look very much for internal folks to migrate up. And sometimes it takes external, but that's a key piece is really getting the sort of point of view of the CEO of how they want to evolve with the business. And that's often a discussion we have early on.
Right. Well, so I guess there's those different examples, right? Where you've got, you may have a company that's on your radar that you're talking to that's very, with a self-aware founder CEO who knows that he or she needs to move out of the business or be in a more functionally appropriate role for the next turn. Other times it may not be so obvious. And to your point, Susan, just in this analysis, those deep dive conversations sound like at a minimum, they take time.
Yeah.
So, and kind of question to everyone, how, knowing that it can take time and there are some different kind of, things and inputs you need to gather, how do you come to that assessment that someone, maybe isn't the right fit or, to scale, or they're in the wrong role? Like, how do you identify that? And then how do you kind of make that decisive? You talked to your point earlier, Susan, about just being decisive, right? Like, how do you then, make those moves and even though it's probably an uncomfortable and maybe will create some ripples, getting out of the way and moving forward?
I think there's a couple things. One is going back to my laundry list of like, what does it take to work with an operating team and within a growth equity or PE firm? Oftentimes, sometimes we come in, and not oftentimes, but there are occasions where there are execs that are just resistant to change, who, either electively or mutually decide that, hey, this is not, I'm used to running a business, not having so much, quote unquote, help, that, they may just elect to not move forward. In the case of other execs that I've got, for example, a sales and marketing lead that will partner with that individual, and, not only during the due diligence phase, but obviously also after in the deep dives, and kind of coming up with this game plan on where we're going to take that organization. And ultimately, that individual needs to own it. It's not our plan, it's their plan. And so there's recognition of, do they get it? And are they, on board with, this is where we collectively think this, we need to take this go-to-market organization. And there may be, once again, signs that that individual isn't in for the long haul, or just doesn't get it. And so, unfortunately, that's where we have to have those direct conversations. And, at the end of the day, these are all people. So all of this is done in a very respectful way. We have a reputation to, we're all about people. And so how we bring people in, how we mentor, coach them, we need to be as caring with how, we exit them, if that ends up being the case. So, all along, there's got to be, all of it needs to be done with a ton of respect for the individual.
I mean, the empathy is a huge piece. I think that makes a ton of sense. Question from the audience. How and for Ishan, we'll start with you, but maybe get a quick input from everybody. How do operators who maybe are, in transition, executives who are, in between things, or soon to be, what are best practices about getting on your respective radars? Like, how do executives approach you and do it in a meaningful, impactful way, such that you'll kind of, stop and pay attention and be willing to engage?
So it's obviously direct reach outs. As far as we go, a direct reach out isn't just kind of sending us your LinkedIn profile or your resume. Give us ideas, right? Tell us where you believe a vertical, a sub-vertical, a problem statement, there is a unique way where you potentially know how to solve for it. Where is the opportunity landscape? And then we're also very open to ideas around, have you looked at company ABC? It's trading at XYZ multiple, and we believe that there is tremendous value creation that someone like you with your investment thesis around being product-centric, being AI-centric, you can truly transform this. And I'd love to kind of partner with you on it, right? Other than that, it could be looking at very specific portfolio companies. Portfolio companies obviously have a lot of press out there. The press could be a new product release. It could be a new round of funding, right? Identifying within a portfolio company where you believe you can add a uniquely differentiated value set. I think most of us are very, very open towards new ideas, towards executives that believe that there is a value creation thesis, but engage with us on something which is quantifiable and something which is idea and innovation driven.
one thing I'll add is that there's a bunch of search firms that target private equity, growth equity, for all the reasons that I mentioned earlier. It's a particular DNA of an individual that fits within those environments. And so, yes, the direct reach out works. Yes, please do your homework before you reach out, and provide some context why you think you'd be great within TCV. But just as important, I think it's finding those search firms that have a pulse on multiple companies that are firms that are hiring, and getting on their radar.
Any thoughts, Todd?
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, do your homework. Direct reach outs work. I always find I've in fact found executives through that, or maybe the next level down. But it's the ones that really stick out that have said, here's my specific skill set. I understand that's probably what you're looking for in your portfolio. These are the companies that, intrigue me and are interested, might be interesting, and then I can sort of very easily say, okay, well, boom, if that's the company, and that's a skill set, let me look and see what are the opportunities there. If it's, here's my resume, now I have to do the work, and I get lots of them. I have to do the work to figure out their background, figure out where exactly they fit, and that that just is less likely to succeed. I agree on the search firms as well, but ultimately, it's also about just being doing well in your role. And we'll generally speaking, we look at so many different companies, and we often ask about talent. So that's another way is if you're in the target segment. Just being kind of continue to do really good work, and we're often talking to the executives there and saying, what talent is great, and hopefully they tee people up as well. So it's often a network that helps tee you up, and if you have a strong network, then that's going to be even more powerful.
Yeah. One additional note to get on our radar. I've noticed I get a crop of resumes that are like, I ran an organization of 100 people, and it's just kind of a laundry list of what their organization looks like versus how did you improve it? How did you grow it? How did you, move the needle? How did you expand it? And so that's a huge, differentiator in just, resume viewing that will cause me to pause and look at yours versus kind of dismiss it.
And that's all
very insightful. It gets back to, are you a runner of the business or are you a changer of the business?
Right, right. And I won't claim this as my own, but I talked to an operating partner at a very well-known PE firm who said that a lot of the outreach that he gets is kind of, he blanketed under like, look at me, I'm a really good Swiss Army knife, right? And I can do all these things, but if in certain instances he needs an Allen wrench, like he needs to know that people can do those specialized, unique things that differentiate them from a jack of all trades. So I think that's all really useful feedback. Weaving in some comments that have come in through the chatter here from the audience. I think at least I think most of you have commented on the importance of kind of balance, right? I mean, even if you have a star CEO, but there's, leaks along the executive team, like there's importance around having a balanced team, finding synergy, being rounded. So can we, Todd, I'll start with you. Can you talk about how do you think about ensuring that there's a complementary balanced team? And then with one further addition, how do you think about that from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective and making sure that that's at the forefront? Yeah.
So I'll actually start with the second part. I mean, diversity, D&I is extremely important to us. It's kind of a core strategy of ours and core focus of ours, going forward. We want to do, work with our portfolio companies and make sure they understand that that's critical. We highlight that up front. We are looking, obviously we have control over the board, so we're clearly looking for, D&I on the board level. Clearly in the executive level, when there's openings there, we're working with our search firms to require a diverse pool, so that we have opportunities to look across that. And then we just often, we're start with tracking and seeing where the current companies are in terms of their diversity and really sort of setting that as the baseline, and then over our whole period, hopefully improving that. So that's something that's critical to us. We're strong believers in diversity of thought and perspectives is going to grow a company. There's all sorts of research on that. And so, that's something that, we're very strong about and encourage, significantly. In terms of kind of the executive team and kind of the how it works, I think that's something that people miss often, is they're looking for individuals. Who's the best CRO? Who's the best, CMO or CTO? And it really needs to fit within the ecosystem of the executive team. And I've seen executive teams that have individual talents that are phenomenal and on paper excellent, but they just don't work well together. And if that happens, then the company, is not going to be as successful as it can be. So for us, we're really looking for, as an example, when we were looking at a business, we were going to bring in a CEO. That person, the CEO, did not have deep, product talent, and recognize that. So obviously, we needed a more visionary individual in the product group who could help, really think in the future. We also knew that they were, the CEO was very sort of, very straightforward person, could execute extremely well, but sort of also needed that vision within the technology as well. So, now when we're going out searching for some of those other roles, we really needed those roles to bring that vision to the table, to complement the execution capabilities that the CEO had. So, it's understanding who those individuals are, it's understanding what their strengths and weaknesses are, and then, building around a group. And then it's beyond that, it's a lot of work, right? It is making sure that the executive team has regular touch points, that you're tracking the relationships amongst them, that you're making sure that they're collaborative. You can see that during executive team meetings that you join and board meetings and other such, touch points. But that's, it's something that is, I think, often, underseen, I guess, and something that you need to work on extremely, a lot. So
one best practice, just to dovetail on what Todd just said, there's a whole set of best practices that ultimately I used at my last firm as well as this firm around executive effectiveness. Because to your point, Todd, you may have the most robust, well-staffed exec team, but there is a lot of legwork that needs to be done to ensure optimum effectiveness. So Patrick Lencioni has, a whole host of books and tools and things like that. Quite frankly, I haven't found anything better on the market. And those are things that, we bring to the attention of our execs, so that because once again, at the end of the day, if you don't have an exec team that's effective, the organization sees it. And so the more that we can perfect that, logically, the organization will be better run. And then on the diversity note, that's another area where, huge initiative for TCV. We actually just recently pulled together a best practice on how our companies can have an effective DEI program. And obviously there's, everyone's at a different level in that regard, but, have had one webinar, and actually we're going to have an unconscious bias training session for our companies coming up. But once again, it's we can do things once and then avail those to the portfolio so that they can up the ante in how they're looking at diversity, because the results show companies that are diverse perform better, and it's just the right thing to do.
That's awesome. It just, and as a quick side note there, at Bowdoin Group, we're using a firm called QPS, Quantum Power Skills. That's done a really good job helping us, to your point about unconscious bias, just identifying, eliminating, how do you, from a talent pool, perspective, how do you think about, asking questions and opening up, kind of untapped pools of talent that can obviously promote the DE&I perspective. So it's been really enlightening from how we've been thinking about it. Ishan, thoughts from you on that?
Sure. So we've actually done a lot of thinking on diversity and diversity as it pertains specifically to innovation. And we look at diversity on two dimensions. Is there an inherent trait of diversity, or is there an acquired trait of diversity? Our research shows that these two dimensions of diversity, as long as there is a significant difference in thought, you will get exponential innovation. So is there diversity in background, in thinking, in an approach to solving a problem? And is there diversity in your risk-taking ability? And if you have those 4 or 5 traits across these two dimensions of diversity, inherent could simply be, do you kind of have minorities? Do you have women? Do you have LGBTQ, right? And then there are acquired traits of diversity, which is, can you mix a product and services team? Can you mix a late stage founder with, or a late stage operator with an early stage founder? We call that an acquired trait of diversity. And as long as these traits exist, we believe that it's naturally far more conducive towards innovation. And then that innovation obviously has a certain amount of enterprise value creation, because at the end of the day, a lot of our kind of role and goal is obviously benchmarked against quantifiably what do we do on enterprise value creation.
And FYI, I just put a book recommendation out there for all panelists in the chat. It's a great read on the topic of diversity and inclusion.
Thank you, Susan.
You bet.
I fully echo your point, Ishan, about, like, you know, diversity in the broadest sense, right? And to your point about diversity of thought and bringing in different paradigms and kind of mindsets, I think can ultimately create, I mean, that's one of the things we're learning for QPS is that the statistics around, you know, organizational effectiveness and overall kind of success metrics, when those things are put in place firmly, I mean, it's you know, it's very obvious when you start to see it. So I know we're getting short on time here. I want to weave in a few more audience questions here. There was one a moment ago, hopefully I get this right, but you know, when you're talking about the power of networks, right, and being able to leverage those as investors and as kind of, you know, partners within the organization, how do you trade between, you know, when you think about like having a need, a CRO or a, you know, CFO or something, how do you trade between the decision that, you know, kind of go maybe the potentially quicker or easier route through network versus do we want to test that person against the field and do a comprehensive search? Susan, do you want to start on that?
Yeah, you know what, we do like to do kind of an assessment of what's out there. Even if we feel like we've got a great candidate in kind of in queue, we do like to do our due diligence, just to do a sanity check. You know, we've got a search going on right now. We think we've got the candidate, but you know, as we're courting and having discussions in that regard, we're obviously, you know, looking at others because there's no guarantee that we're going to make a match. And, you know, I think it just gives us extra confidence and, you know, conviction on ultimately, you know, whomever we choose.
Todd, any of you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, first of all, you know, looking within our network, you know, is sometimes not necessarily easier because it is about the right fit, the right role, the right timing for that executive. And so even though we may have a great, you know, individual that we've identified, it's, you know, is this the move they want to make at this time? And so, you know, it's not always sort of the quicker and easier path. So, but with that being said, we always, you know, generally do start there. You know, if you know someone, can trust them, you know how they operate, you know, that de-risks the decision significantly versus going in and getting someone that obviously you just interview and have, you know, a few hours with through the interview process, but, you know, don't fundamentally know in depth. And so, you know, we obviously start there. I do think, you know, we go to search often if that's not successful, if we can't find the right person within the network for the right, you know, either there's not the right timing or right person, or, you know, very specific roles where just our network is not strong and the search firm has depth, you know, in that specific space, you know, for us, tech, and then obviously the specific role that we're looking for that may be unique. And, you know, we try to curate the search firms that we work with who have experience in, you know, $30 to $100 million tech companies and have, you know, been there and done that and can hit the ground running, you know, and then even then specific roles. So we're highly targeted in the way that we deploy search firms because, and you know, once we build up an experience with them, we tend to go back. So that's kind of our approach with that.
Excellent. Well, I know we're a minute over here, so I want to be respectful of everyone's calendars here. Maybe we can go around quickly, parting thoughts from folks, any sort of, maybe we can end on a bright note. What are we optimistic about in 2021? Any sort of trends or, kind of parting, sage advice that you would throw out to the folks who are listening in? Susan, you want to start?
Certainly. At the end of the day, all of our companies, our firm, it's all about people. And I think that's where, we are putting such importance on that fact, on not only, cultivating the existing set of folks that we have within our ecosystem, but cultivating, more and new folks. And certainly it's one where you don't necessarily need to have private equity experience to get in the door, but a willingness and aptitude and interest in learning how to do it. So there's a lot of piqued interest out there in just joining the ranks and getting as part of your career remit, growing companies in an expedient way. So I'm optimistic with the interest that we'll have opportunities.
Awesome. Ishan?
So for those who are interested in the private equity space, the advice that I would give is one, in a post-COVID world, even assuming everyone's vaccinated, we are back at work. None of us are going to go back, in my sense, to work 5 days a week. Our candidate pool is going to massively increase because our thinking has now changed towards, yes, we can work with candidates in remote locations. Two, there is a Silicon Valley favorite word, which is called pivot. Private equity funds, much like anyone else, we pivot multiple times. Folks that are out there who have a level of depth in domain subject matter expertise, try and augment that with some level of all-round athlete type skills, because for us, that is paramount once we kind of make these set pivots at every portfolio company. At the end of the day, there is the single most important skill that at least we look at in terms of hiring across our portfolio companies, be it an associate all the way to the CEO, is, are you going to be a hustler out there? If you're a hustler, our doors are always kind of open to you.
That's great. Todd, bring us home.
Yeah. So look, I'm optimistic. I think it's a great time to be both an investor and to be an entrepreneur, founder, a person who's leading a growth company. There's, first of all, a ton of private equity capital in the market right now looking to be deployed. So people are investing in businesses that are showing strength. And obviously, as terrible as COVID was, and it has been hugely impactful, it has disrupted many industries and given a lot of opportunities for new ideas to come to the surface. And as Ishan said, there's new ways to work, new ways to address customer pain points, new ways to address business pain points that, have just changed. And so, I think there are unique business models that are coming to the forefront through this and that will sustain. Obviously, some have just been benefited from a COVID bump, but others are here to stay. And so I think it's a really exciting time to be on our side of the fence, which is deploying capital to really interesting businesses and working with great talent. And it's really good to be on the other side, working in growth companies, because there's really just opportunity now where the old ways of doing things are no longer necessarily the case. So go disrupt, go break through walls, and and reach out, because we'd like to give you money. We can.
I'll take some of that. We'll sidebar that, but that's all very well said. I'm very optimistic and confident about. I think there's just a renewed and even a heightened sense of empathy in the market now. We've all gone through something very tough, and it's quite a shared experience. And I think certain markets have benefited from a significant acceleration. I mean, look at the state of technology, and I'm thankful that we're able to still withstand and even thrive in this kind of environment. So, hopefully that'll continue forward. But anyway, thank you to Susan, Ishan, Todd. Thank you so much for joining and spending your time. And I hope whether you're a listener who's an investor, an operator, a search professional, whatever, hopefully you took something away from this and can carry forward. So thanks all, and
Thank
we'll
you.
talk to you later.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.